Okay, so we've got the paths made. In the paths window here, paths palette actually, available under Windows Paths. We have some masks created and saved inside the channels palette, which you get to under Windows Channels. And we have the one layer so far, that of course is just in the layer palette. Now, what you'll want to do at this point, keep in mind that the final file that you'll be turning in will have the photo layer, the full pattern layer, and then the applied pattern layer. So we need to name those, but later, because right now we need to have essentially a working area to build into. So that's what we're doing here. We need to start building things. So we'll have a pattern. Let's go ahead and create a pattern by going to our adjustment layer and going to pattern. Voila, we've got some patterns. You can load in your own patterns here. Remember, you can get to that by clicking on the pattern type, clicking out here, and on the little gear icon, and then loading patterns from your previous assignments. You can also create a new pattern if you'd like, or you can create an image that you want to have kind of put on. Patterns are much better for this than images, because a lot of times you'll be tempted not to have the image wrapping around the clothes. That's not really what this assignment's about. I want to show off your whole skills. All right, since I'm not doing this assignment for credit, unlike you guys, I'm just going to go ahead and use a nature pattern, which I've loaded in by just going to the nature patterns and appending them. I've already done that though, so I don't need to do that again. Crank this up to a scale that makes sense, maybe around 560 something. There we go. Ooh, that's looking good. Tell it okay. I don't need the mask on this because, let's get rid of that, because hey, I've already got a mask ready to be created. And I will end up needing two of these though. I'll need the original pattern and I will need another one put in, but I'm going to do something a little special. The displacement map can't be applied directly onto a pattern layer. So if we were to go filter, distort, displace, it will complain that it's a fill. It can't be done. You have to rasterize. We don't really want to rasterize. We might need to adjust this later. So instead, I'm going to convert to a smart object. I'm going to make a copy of this smart object. Remember that these are pointing to the same smart object. So at this point, if I were to go in and make a change, why do I have an extra layer there? Get out of there. And make a change, like say, oh, I actually want this a little bit bigger. I want this 560 maybe. Or let's say I want it really small, like 130. Like, okay, there we go. That will mean that I don't only have this set to 130, I have the other one set to 130. So they're both pointing to the same file, which in this case can be quite useful. If we decide that we need a different pattern, we can change that out and all of our files will still match. So I'm going to crank this back up to 565 and tell it okay. And save the PSB. All right, and close that up. Voila, so both of these are now still the same size. That's great. Okay, so if we were to just apply our masks, which is easy enough since we already went through the process of creating all of these paths and then converting it into a channel, we've already got that. I'm going to go ahead and use this one. Just going to right click, sorry, not in this version of Photoshop. I'm just going to go down to this button that loads the channel as a selection. Notice I've got the marching ants now. If we zoom in on here. So now I know that it's loaded in as a selection. Go back to RGB so I can see what I'm doing. Double click the hand tool so it fits on screen. Go back to my layers palette real fast. I'm going to make a mask right here. Notice I did this after converting it to a smart object so that the mask is independent of the smart object itself. So in other words, I can turn it on and off this guy here. So this doesn't look super great, right? It's just a flat cutout on top of everything. Now I could do something like put it in a mode. Keep in mind in this assignment, I'm not asking for you to maintain the color. So you could just like go multiply. It's still flat. Look at this. It's not curving around any of these bins. It looks terrible. This would be a bad grade for you guys. This isn't what you want. What you want is a displacement map so that everything will just match in beautifully. So we need to create that displacement map. Now we'll need to start with an image. So we'll come on over here and I'm just going to right click on layer 0, duplicate layer, and what should we call this? Dress displace. Typing one-handed, so it's a bit of work there. So, but I don't want it to go to the document 3 masks, which I'm working in, I actually want to create a new document and name it the dress displays. So now I have 2 documents open. And on this one, I'm going to do some adjustments. Now, first thing I'm going to do is pop into levels, holding down the levels key. Holding down the Alt key. Oh wait, before I do anything else, notice this icon. It means that it's doesn't have the current histogram. It has a cached one. Hit that button so I get the most recent one. Perfect. Holding down the Alt key and grabbing the black point will allow me to see what I'm clipping. I'm not going to want to clip into the dress, but all of this stuff, all of this data, I don't need that because I'm only concentrating on the dress for the displacement map. Perfect. So now it's nice in there. Over here, I'm clipping on the white. Again, holding down the Alt key, I can drag this around, but holding down the Alt key lets me see what's clipping. I don't want anything in the dress clipping. I want to keep that golden. Great. All right, so that's looking way better. Now, make another adjustment layer, this time for black and white, because I need it in black and white to do my work. So you'll have to play around with this, but what I like to have is a lot of grays so things slide around beautifully. Between the blacks and the white, but sometimes you want a starker contrast, so you'll need to play with your image to decide what you want. And keep in mind, I'm not paying attention to the skin tone. The dress is all that matters to me right now. So this shadow is looking okay, I think. I think this will work. This looks pretty good. So you might want to save this out as a sort of in-process file in case you want to go back and do more adjustments. That's never a bad idea. So call it dress displace. Working file might be good. And then we'd want one that is set specifically to be used as a displacement map. Now, just the PSD should be sufficient for current versions of Photoshop, but if you're an old version of Photoshop, you'll have to do some extra adjustments. So let's go ahead and do it that way. First, I'm going to flatten this. I'm going to go to the flyout menu on the layers palette, and I'm going to go to flatten image, nice and flat. And then I'm going to set the mode instead of our delicious RGB that we use for our glorious scale of colors, our whole spectrum there. I'm going to go to grayscale. And it says, whoa, remember to control the conversion, use the image adjustments black and white. Well, we did that through an adjustment layer instead, so it's fine. Hit discard. I save as this time. And when I save as, and keep in mind that's just file, save as. I have key commands all over the place. This isn't a working one. This is a dress displace map. Well, it's actually dress displacement map, but let's move on so we don't make you sit around for every little thing. All right, so now I've got this displacement map file ready to go. It's a PSD file, which is great. It's Photoshop default. So now I have this mask, but I actually don't need it quite yet. Well, I mean, I guess I can. Let's go ahead and get rid of it. We'll reapply it. Just be lazy. So I've got this guy. I've got send multiply. We'll set it to normal real fast. Okay, so, and I'll turn on both the patterns, right? So I have this selected, our instance of the smart object, the pattern fill copy one. I'm going to go up to filter, distort, displace. 15 by 15 is fine to play with. Since this is a smart object, we'll be able to go back in and readjust this. So if you don't like the way that it's distorting, we can come back in and change that. All right, this doesn't matter in this case because I made the displacement map the exact same size as the image that we're working on. Otherwise, you need to choose either stretch to fit or tile. I would normally recommend stretch to fit. And as we know from having played with it earlier, we don't want wraparound. We want to repeat the edges so that everything stretches out. Tell it OK. Oh no, where is it? Well, it's called dress displacement map, or sorry, dress displace map. There. Well, something changed, but what was that? If we click it off, oh, you see that? There's like a figure hidden in there. Let me turn off the second pattern fill here so we can see below. Time to apply our masks. So go back to the channel, go back to our saved alpha channel, click the little button, we get the selection, come over to layers again. If you have both these palettes separated, you don't have to click around as much, but for screen real estate in this demo, I have them all smushed together. Sort of. It doesn't seem to want to smush together at all. We'll leave it where it is. Make sure that you have the pattern layer with the displacement map selected and not the smart filter selected. That will not do it. Notice we're only seeing this black and white. What's going on? Back in channels, I forgot to choose RGB. Now I can see what I'm working on. So go under layers, make sure you have the actual layer selected and not the smart filter. We don't want to do that. We're going to go ahead and add a layer mask. And now we've got this. This is quite a bit different. Notice that it's wrapping around folds now. Again, you don't have to have color stored. So if we go over to screen mode, for example, to lighten it, well, that doesn't look super great with this. Let's try the overlay mode. No, that looks like she's turned transparent. Our go-to for darkening is multiply. There we go. That looks like it preserves the most. Again, since I'm not requiring that you preserve the colors, the fact that everything darkened a bit, that's fine. If you want to go through and preserve all the colors, I will be duly impressed. And that's a great way to bump up your grade a little bit. But it takes a lot of time, so plan for that. So now we've got this happening quite nicely, but we still don't have the highlights and the midtones that we used to have. Well, we're in our working file. Now's a great time to save, by the way, if you haven't done that. So I'm going to save this. Let's call this displacement map, or displacement demo for me, or how about dis demo? I like that, dis demo. All right, so we've got the dis demo, but what we really need is to have access to those lights and darks super easily. So we already made that displacement map earlier. If we were to open that up, that's actually a really useful tool. Make sure you know where you're storing everything. So we've got the dress displace map. So I need to move this over here. There are a couple ways you can do that. You can either right click and duplicate layer and then move it into the other document. Do Control A, Control C, Control V, however you want to do it. I'm just going to right click on this, duplicate layer, and then move it to the dis demo. Tell it OK. Now I can close up my dress displace map. And now we've got this here. So what was the point of that? Well, because we removed all the color in this, we have access to the tonal range only, which is great because now if we do a select color range, we're not actually doing a color range, we're doing a tonal range selection, which means if we come in here with the standard sampler and click, we're getting all the highlights. Well, we don't care about the faces or the what's being selected in the background because we've got masks for all of that. So we have a great way of selecting all of the highlights very, very easily. I'm just going to use a 440 fuzziness. I'm not going to use localized color clusters. I'm going to ignore my cat who wants to know why I'm not sitting in the living room with him right now. Sorry, cat. And I'm going to go ahead and tell it okay. We'll just get, well, let's test a couple of highlights. What do we have here? Let's play around. That looks better. That's just the highlights. Tell it okay. Now I've got all the highlights selected, but what do I do with that? Well, I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call it highlights. And I'm going to fill it with either a white or a light gray. Let's go ahead and do a white in this case. And check out what happens. Let me turn off the eyeball on this, call it background. We'll call it black and white. So I can see it. There we go. See what it is. All right, on the highlights, I fill this. Wrong key. Alt delete is a great way to do that with the foreground color. Control, is it foreground color? I always get that backwards. Let's see. Alt delete. Yeah, it's the foreground color. Got it right. Okay, Control D to deselect. So now I've got the highlights, but it's blocking out everything. Well, we know the perfect mode for just making highlights, screen mode. So it's still super, super bright. So I'm just going to come in here and make sure that the fill opacity is like drop down a bit on it so that it's not quite that bright. Now, if this were a gray instead of a white, then it wouldn't have had that blinding effect. Might have been a good idea to go in. Notice in this case, opacity might work fine too. Oh, that's nice. That's looking really nice. Let's do the same for the darks. Turn off the highlights for a second. Go back to the black and white. Make a new layer. Call it shadows. Come in with a select color range. And notice we've got quite a bit of darks in here. So instead of just using the standard eyedropper, I'm going to use the eyedrop plus. And start getting the shadowy areas. Perfect. Again, I'm going to ignore all this. We can apply displacement map. I'm sorry. You can apply a mask. So let's go ahead. I'll turn off the black and white layer. Got the shadows. D for default. Alt delete to fill with black. It's too dark. We'll set to multiply. It's still too dark. We'll drop down the opacity. You know what? Let's do it this way. Step back in time. Instead of solid black and dropping down the opacity, like I said, you can fill it with a dark gray instead. So let me Alt Delete and set it to multiply. And right away that had a better effect. I don't really have to mess too much with the opacity now. But look how messed up all that other stuff is. What do? Well, we have our mask. We could go back to our channels where we stored the mask, but I have it right here. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key and drag the mask up to my shadows. Voila, that duplicated the mask. There you go, turn on my highlights. Again, it's messing with the face. You can see some in the hands, that fingernail. All that's not right. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, drag a new copy of the mask. Thank you, Alt key. Now if I zoom out, this is starting to look pretty good. There's still some issues though. If you come on in here, you'll notice that it may not wrap around quite enough in some of the edges. There's some weird distortion going on in some of the places. We can fix those with some of our other tools, such as Puppet Warp and Liquify. So we'll play with that in just a minute. Let me go ahead and make a new video for you guys so you don't have to sit here and watch an entire other one. And this even more for longer and longer time. See you in a minute.